now we've gone over social exchange theory, gone over how to identify unsuitable versus unsuitable partners, and now we're going to go into how to reach out and write cold emails. So first of all, I think what we need to start with is, again, identifying the channels, right? So when you go and you're identifying the organizations, you want to see how they receive inquiries. How do they, are they actively inviting partnerships? Are they actively, like posting quite a bit on social media? Do they have a blog, for example? Or think about LinkedIn or expression of interest forms on their websites, or a straight up email, for example, if there's like if they advertise an email on their website, or, for example, an email on LinkedIn or their staff, or, you want to have a look, basically. You want to have a look around because the format and the length, of course, of your message will differ depending on where you're sending it. So definitely need to do that first. Go into your identifying channel. So you definitely need to do that first. Have a look and to see where you're going to be sending this message, basically. But if we assume it's via email, which most of the time it will be, we have an example, cold email, that we're going to go over. So we're going to go over this example. This is an example of a cold email. This was actually sent to me by one of our alumni, who, asked me for some feedback, and this was the feedback I gave them at the time. And they very graciously allowed us to use this as an example for you guys here today. So what I'm going to do is, first, I want you to pause this video real quick and have a read of the email up until where it says, best regards. Okay, so once you've had a read of the email, now we're going to go over some of the bits and pieces here. So obviously, you'll notice that I've anonymized both the startup that wrote the email and then also the people that they were writing it to. I've removed their names here for privacy, and then also you'll notice that I've replaced them here with prospect, org, and startup, and then in addition to that, I've also made some comments here. So my first comment was here. So, first of all, I think I'll start actually real quick with some kind of overall observations. So my first observation when I read this was that it just didn't sound very real. It didn't sound conversational. I think that, sometimes it's our instinct to write things, in a very kind of, formal or academic almost way when we're reaching out to someone that we don't know, and particularly in a business context. And that is important. It is important, absolutely, to be professional when you're writing to people, and particularly people that you don't know in a professional context. However, you do need to find that balance between professionalism and also, remaining, I guess, human, and not bogging your email down with too much formal academic language, basically. We'll go over this. So I'm the co-founder of an upcoming medtech startup. So my first piece of advice was here is that, when an upcoming medtech startup. So I think that there's two bits to this. So one, I reckon the writer meant up and coming. Upcoming, makes it sound like the startup doesn't exist yet. So I think this is kind of a bit of a, potentially as well a bit of a language barrier thing. And in addition to this, the use of the word of the I guess the phrase up and coming in this context doesn't, no one speaks about themselves that way, basically, is what I'm getting at, right? That's the kind of thing that is said about startups, but just not by their founders. You know what I mean? No one says, oh, I've got an up and coming startup. People say, oh, that startup is up and coming, or that medtech startup is up and coming, or they use that phrase to describe you as opposed to using it to describe yourself. A really good tool for this kind of thing is Grammarly. It's a free extension that you can install in your browser or even in your Gmail, and it just makes it, not only does it kind of have your back for when you, accidentally, include some typos in there, but also it can help you with the way that you phrase things. So that was one of my first bits. My second piece right here was that the writer made mention of Catalysr, of the accelerator. And there are some implications with mentioning, if you're in an accelerator, if you're in Catalysr, for example, or if you're in another one, there can be some implications with making mention of, the accelerator or the incubator that you are, working with. So one is that lots of accelerators and or incubators, they have rules around whether or not you can use their name for these purposes, because you are effectively, in this context, you are kind of using their brand name, as a support. And so, number one, I guess ask yourself, what are the rules at your organization, whether that's Catalysr or outside of Catalysr? Even if you're using, for example, a person's name and you're saying, hey, I actually met you through Marlo, or I spoke to Marlo about you, you want to make sure Marlo is okay with the fact that you're mentioning her name, right? So just be conscious of the rules. And then another issue that the feedback I gave them in this instance was that it could potentially make their organization look a bit too early stage by making mention of us in this context. And then here we've got novel technology. I think this again plays into wanting to use fancy language, in these kinds of emails to appear professional. So, the use of the words novel technology, whereas, in truth, very few technologies these days are novel, like very few. We'll continue. So we share the same mission as Prospect org. The intention behind this is really good, but it does need to be reworded, because in this instance, the Prospect org is an organization that works, to improve mental health. And in theory, everyone agrees with that mission, right? So it's kind of the way it's worded that way makes it sound kind of pointless, though I understand the intent. The intent here is to put the link into words. It's like, this is why I'm reaching out, right? It's because you and I are doing the same thing. So in this case, the difference is, everyone's on board with improving mental health, but the way that we are linked is that we are both doing it. We are both doing the work to improve people's mental health. There's a bit more on that as we go along, but we'll continue. We've got some more comments here. We've got another one is, as the pandemic has affected healthcare workers the most. So this is language that you have to be careful with, like using the words like most, or very absolute words like ever, like more than ever, or it's affected healthcare workers the most, or never, just very kind of absolute language. It's arguable. And the issue is that when you put something, albeit inadvertently, that is debatable or arguable like that, like, for example, in this context, it says, as the pandemic has affected healthcare workers the most. Listen, it's kind of setting up potential for your conversation, for your request to be derailed, or, taken from, because this kind of language is a bit distracting, can be some distracting, because you argue it. You can say that, depending on the person reading this as well, because this is very emotionally charged as well, of course, you want to make sure that you don't use language like that. So in this case, you can still illustrate the point that healthcare workers are absolutely affected and significantly so by the pandemic, but perhaps this is this is an opportunity to actually illustrate your point with a bit of data. So, for example, saying pandemic has affected healthcare workers the most is debatable. You could say, well, no, the people, here, the people that suffered this, the people that suffered that, were affected the most by the pandemic. but you can't. But if you just said healthcare workers are amongst the most affected by the pandemic, then there's no reason for debate. There's no reason to argue. And I think, again, it's kind of, in that way, your sentence is taken as a piece of context as opposed to as opposed to kind of like a distraction. And of course, if you're going to make any kind of claim of that nature, then you should also have the data to back it up. And then here, again, we've got urgent and essential. And the thing is, this goes back to the fancy language, because of course it is urgent and essential, but when you read it in this context, it's always been urgent and essential. It's always been urgent and essential to provide prevention and intervention strategies for healthcare workers to prevent burnout. It's just that now it's a lot worse than what it was before. And another thing to consider here is like this is a really important, again, put into context in who you're speaking to and who is going to be reading this email. This organization that the writer is emailing here has been operating since way before the pandemic. And so they've known about this issue that the startup is trying to solve for quite some time. So this isn't news to them. You don't want them to feel lectured to. And also it can potentially make you sound a little bit uneducated about what you're talking about. It's kind of you just need to be careful when you're speaking to people who know a lot more than you about the problem that you're trying to solve. And here we have another one. So this one, So this sentence was going well until aimed to establish evidence-based studies. Again, this is all about the getting distracted with the fancy language. Then we've got this we at startup name instead of just saying we. This, I think, is often a technique to try to make your startup sound bigger. Don't do it. It sounds weird. It's unnecessary. Just say we. This part as well, would be obliged to connect with you and collaborate for bringing better outcomes. Again, good intent, just poorly worded. Would be obliged sounds like, oh, we have to reach out to you. It also assumes that they would have to work with you when it's not the case. It's just a bit, it's just a bit odd, but ultimately, again, I think this is just like the intent is good, but this really should be flipped on its head, in that the writer here should take this particular opportunity to be more specific about what they want out of a partnership or a collaboration with this prospective partner. And then last but not least, this was probably one of the more important points as well, which is how you end this email. And this is where your sales skills come into play. So this is where you want to close it. This is where you want to close the deal. So the easiest way, so you'll notice here in this email, they've said, if this is something you're interested in, kindly let me know and we can discuss further. Well, first of all, if I'm reading this email as a prospective partner, it's a bit weak in terms of the call to action. It's just like, oh, please let me know and we can keep talking. It's like, all right. It's not, the call to action is not strong enough, right? So if you really want to close someone, what you want when you send an email like this is you want them to respond to you saying, hey, I am absolutely interested in, at the very least, speaking to you. And this is when I can do it, or I can do it at that time. So this is where you want to ask a question where the word no is not a feasible answer. So if I say apples or oranges, you can't say no, right? It doesn't make sense. If you say, would you like to meet with me? It's easier to say no, or just ignore your email, basically. But in this case, it's, I would recommend ending this with saying, an opportunity to have a quick 30-minute chat with you regarding XYZ would be really helpful while we figure out XYZ. We're available on this time, and on this time. Alternatively, let me know and we'll be happy to work around your schedule. Looking forward to speaking to you. This is the way you end these emails are really important, because that is literally the last thing that they read before they make the decision to respond or ignore you. And ultimately, no matter how well you write cold emails, there will always be people who ignore you. So accept that from now. It'll be fine. It's nothing personal. Your conversions will get better as your emails get better. But ultimately, there will always be people that will ignore emails. Straight up. There's nothing you can do about it. Other observations here in this email is that, and this is also vital, but we didn't really identify it so far, is that the startup's request isn't really clear. They, at no point did they say here, we want to partner with you to conduct studies. They never said, we want to partner with you because we want to get into your grant program. They didn't say, we want to do a joint marketing campaign. They said nothing about what they want. They did not make any indication, or they didn't infer any cost to the prospect org. So the prospect org has no cost to consider when they make their cost benefit analysis. Second to that, there's no mention of the benefit either to the prospect org. So basically, and this is a tricky one as well, right? Because, when you have something to offer, then it's a lot easier to say, I would love this, and potentially we could discuss that. Or we could both give each other this and then both give each other that type thing. And so it's easy to make mention of the cost and the benefit. Sometimes you don't have anything to give the prospective partner, right? Or the prospective org. So you don't always have to make mention or be specific about what you can give. But I think you should absolutely be specific about what you would like and what you would like to discuss and how you would like to work together to find, a solution or something that works for both parties. But regardless, you do have to acknowledge it. You do have to acknowledge it in this email. And then again, making mention of Grammarly. So I've written this email down here. So you can just pause the video real quick and have a read through it. I've tried to make some of the changes on the feedback that we discussed above around language, around including data, including the cost and the benefit, and then also just at that end part in terms of closing a time to meet and to discuss further with them. So do take a minute to pause the video and have a read of that. But otherwise, we're going to go back to the rest of our tips. Okay, so kind of what I was saying earlier in the beginning of that cold email exercise is about making it conversational, about trying to avoid academic and super fancy language and big words as much as possible. You really want to humanize the person reading it. Something that I found to be really effective and a good kind of icebreaker is, making brief mention of the weather or happenings. Something you need to consider is that, and I think this is very kind of easy to forget, specifically when you're speaking to people at organizations whose brand you perceive as larger, as someone from a big company or someone from a company that's global or that's always in the news or that you've known for quite a long time. You really need to humanize that interaction because I think I think it'll be a more pleasant interaction, and then second to that, you want to get yourself in the headspace of that you're speaking to someone who's your equal, someone who is on the same level as you. And ultimately, people are people. We are all living in the same world. And, I've found it very effective to make kind of very brief mention of the weather, for example, or things that are happening. So, for example, if I'm sending an email on a Monday, I'll always write, hope you had a great weekend, or something along those lines. Or if it's a Friday, every email I send on a Friday says Happy Friday. And then it ends with, hope you have a great weekend. So, I mean, definitely don't go too crazy with that kind of stuff. But it really does, it humanizes the person reading it. And, So, another tip here, we've got draft, sleep on it, revise. So when you actually sit down to write an email, you can often, you'll get writer's block, no matter what at some point. And you'll be, you may become really frustrated or whatever. My advice is, like, get it all out. Don't think about how crappy it is. You're not going to send it to anyone anytime soon. Don't even think about, the language, the this, the that. Really just think about what are the basic things that you need to say in this email and get it on a piece of paper. Then from there, I think sleep on it. So do it, leave it alone. Whether if you've written it down in a notebook or something, close the notebook, or if you've done it online, then close it. Wait, come back the next day. So sleep on it and reread it and start making some changes. That I feel is, definitely one of the easier ways of editing and drafting things is kind of to just throw it all on a piece of paper, leave it for a while, and then come back to it later when you're not really, in the weeds so deeply. Again, using free extensions like Grammarly for good measure, this is super valuable even for, native English speakers, but especially for those of you, and you are many, the majority at Catalysr, that perhaps speak English as a second language, or, there are many dialects of English as well. So, it can be really helpful for, no matter what your level of English is, it can be really helpful with, with kind of typos, accidental typos, or, missing words, or, also just the way that your sentences are structured. Grammarly also provides some suggestions there in terms of the way you've kind of structured things. So I've always found it super, super helpful. I highly recommend it. It's free. Do it. Another thing that you should absolutely do is once you've kind of revised and come up with a draft that you feel happy with, is you should send it around to some of your friends and colleagues. If you can find people that don't care about hurting your feelings, that's probably better. But it's definitely a good idea to get some more eyeballs on your letter. Even if you've revised it a couple of times, it would be really great for you to understand how, what the perception of you and of your company, your friends and colleagues understand from your email. In addition to that, they may find some little things that you haven't really noticed. So yeah, it's definitely valuable. Another thing is that if you can find someone who doesn't really understand the subject matter of what your company or what your product or service does, then it could be a really great exercise as well to see if they understand what you do from reading your email, because you will likely your email will likely be read by someone who doesn't fully understand what you do. So understanding, I guess, how effective you are at explaining your business is also quite valuable. Also, once you kind of come up with a good edit, with a good kind of bone structure, if you will, for your partnership email, highly recommend that you make it a template. You can do this really easily in Google and Gmail settings. Make a template, save yourself loads of time. That way, you can load up the template every time you go to write a new email. And then also they're quite easy to edit as well. So you can edit them with, with kind of very, specific details about the people that you're emailing. But just to make it easier. Of course, it's not going to kill you if you don't. I'm just recommending it because I do it and it makes my life so much easier. And then last but not least, make sure your contact details are in your signature. Make sure your mobile number is there, your LinkedIn, your website, everything. Your full name, LinkedIn, website, mobile number. Okay? If you have a logo, include that as well. But ultimately, make sure they are able to contact you in more ways than one. For whatever reason, if they can't email you back, or if, they are so interested by your email that they decide to call you instead of emailing you because they want to talk to you right now, you want to give them that opportunity. So that's it for everything today. Just here in my last slide, we've got a couple of links. So we've got links to some videos by Lee Waller on YouTube. He explains social exchange theory a lot better than I do. So if you're looking to learn more, I highly encourage you to do so. You can find them here. You can find his YouTube channel just on that link. You can also find a link to the cold email example on this slide as well. So that's pretty much it. So go forth and negotiate great partnerships.